Good afternoon and welcome back to this session of Wilmington City Council's Finance and Economic Development Committee. My name is Bud Friel and I'm hosting the meeting. We just finished doing some question and answers on the Department of Public Works Water and Sewer Fund budget. And now, as we like to do every year, we're going to review the 6-year financial plan for our water sewer fund. But first, I want to acknowledge my colleagues joining us today. We have President Hanifa Shabazz, 1st District Council Member Linda Gray, 3rd District Council Member Santia Oliver, 4th District Council Member Michelle Harley, 6th District Council Member Yolanda McCoy, 7th District Council Member Chris Johnson, and at large we have both Cyril Adams and Loretta Walsh. We've also been joined by Chief of Staff for the Mayor's Office, Tanya Washington, and Chief of Staff for City Council, Marshall Bass Knight. As we know, the Mayor did not propose a water sewer fee increase this year, but we want to kind of still go ahead and look at the 6-year projection for this very important enterprise fund. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our Commissioner of Public Works again, Kelly Williams, to do some quick what am I trying to think here? Quick introductions. Thank you, and then we'll turn it over to our presenters. Kelly, you with us?
I am. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Friel. Thank you, council members. So we're here to present to you the 6-year financial plan, and just a little bit of history. We had one financial plan and then had to come back and revisit it because of the COVID emergency. And so you'll see what we believe is a newly updated, reflective of the current situation, but when you get down into the weeds, it's really, really difficult to predict what's going to happen now. And the information that we have was based on a very short amount of information. So waiting in the wings to do the presentation is our team from Black & Veatch, who've been with us for 13 years now, including Prabha Kumar, Pam Lemoyne, and Rupa Jha. So they will be doing the presentation. Also, I'd like to just mention one more time that we have a new water division director, Christo, who took Sean Duffy's place. So she will be making an appearance hopefully during this presentation as well, so you can put a face with the name. With that, I'd like to go ahead and Prabha, go ahead and kick it off.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good evening, Council Chairman and Council members and my colleagues. So today we are here to talk about the 6-year financial plan. And before we really start, I was wondering, the Director for Water may want to say a few words. If you go to the next slide, please. Director Chris, to you. So let me just mention this. This slide was really in appreciation of what the employees and really the customers of Wilmington are doing at this difficult, challenging time, really extending Public Works Department, extending its appreciation here.
We would like to express our appreciation to all the city employees that have been out there between water and sewer and our trash collectors, police, fire, all the folks that have continued to keep the city operating in these very difficult times. We want to send an appreciation to all of them. Okay.
Director Chris, do you want to talk about?
Together, our utility continues our life-saving mission to deliver high-quality drinking water, safely treat and dispose of wastewater, manage stormwater, address our customers' billing and payment needs and concerns, all while maintaining cost-effective service. We provide these services in collaboration with Department of Finance to meet our customers' needs. And sorry, there's technical difficulty before, but I also like to thank all of the water department as well for stepping up and really providing, you know, continuous service during this trying times of the pandemic.
So what we are going to do today is with my colleagues, we are going to kind of present really the next 6-year outlook. As many of you know who have been through this process every year, the financial discipline. So the question really is why? Why do you need the 6-year financial discipline? The financial discipline, as you all know, is an integral part of really delivering services to Wilmington. And so that's why every year the department prepares a 6-year outlook to make sure that things, any course correction that is needed can be done. And the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund is in good fiscal stability. And more so than ever with this pandemic happening, this year, this has become even more important, as Commissioner Kelly alluded to right in the beginning. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we are really going to give you a high-level details about how we have done this 6-year financial plan, despite the fact that if things are more fluid, especially with respect to revenues coming in. And then we're going to talk about the tangible outcomes. Really, what does this financial plan mean to the city of Wilmington and its ratepayers? Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. Next slide. Folks, next slide. Having a technical difficulty here.
Host lost connection. But put your mic on hold for 1 minute.
Hello?
Just 1 minute.
Folks, we're having some technical difficulties here. We should be back up with the slide presentation any minute now.
So what we're going to talk about is why this financial discipline, and really just give a quick glimpse of the journey Wilmington has been taking with respect to financial forecast. Next slide, please. So as many of you again would remember, this has been a consistent and a long journey that continues on. In 2005 through 2012, that was the toughest period for the Water Sewer Fund, because the fund had to recover the financial balance. The fund was actually in a deficit situation, and it was not meeting the even the baseline financial metrics. So that was a tough situation with all the support from the council members and the administration. There were multiple rate increases, and that difficult phase is kind of behind the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund. Now we are in the build phase, and that really started in 2013 to build the fiscal stability of the Water Sewer Fund so that it would never have to face what it faced between 2005 and 2012. And so starting in 13, really the fund started inching towards meeting what we call the baseline financial plan metrics. And we are still continuing in this plan that we are going to be talking today. So today's plan is going to be for fiscal year 21 through 26, the 6 years. And we'll be talking about how this plan continues to achieve the baseline metrics. And so that's really the crux of what we are going to be presenting. So why is this phase 21 through 26 really important? It is important really because without this phase, it's going to be very difficult for the water sewer fund to position for the fiscal resilience for the long term. And really the utility has to move more towards, from a baseline financial performance metrics, it would really start moving towards enhanced financial performance metrics. Next slide, please. So really why we are here today is to not only talk about the 6-year outlook, but really to understand what the needs are. And if you take a look at the needs, there are really 4 key needs. One is capital improvements. During the next 6 years, we are looking at a total capital improvement as projected in the CIP of $158 million, water, sewer, stormwater, all put together. So that needs to be effectively funded with the lowest cost of borrowing possible. So that's one major critical need because all the aging infrastructure needs to be maintained, including the REBF in the wastewater treatment plant. Second, we continue to have operating expenses, and that's really what helps deliver the life-saving service that Director Chris alluded to. And that requires consistent operating and maintenance expenditures and activities. And that's projected to increase at the rate of about 2.6% annually. And we will discuss that going forward. So to do the capital improvements, to do the operating expenditures, that's challenging in itself for a utility. And this year, for the first time, as you all know, we are also, in addition to it, dealing with a pandemic that really nobody anticipated at this level. And that is impacting, at least in the short term, we are projecting that's going to impact the revenues coming in. And we'll talk a little more about that. And so that also impacts the revenue stability. So despite the pandemic, we need to make sure that the revenue is stable enough to meet the capital and the operating and meet the minimum financial metrics. And we have to do all of this over the next 6 years while managing the rate impact so that we don't have significant rate impact during the next 6 years. So that's really what we're going to be talking about in the next hour or so. Next slide, please.
All right. Councilmember Harley, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to be acknowledged. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about, so how do we establish a pragmatic plan at a time we are dealing with this new challenge? So just as a quick overview, the revenues for the water sewer fund comes from very distinct sources, primarily water user charges, wastewater user charges, stormwater user charges, and then miscellaneous revenues. That, in a nutshell, is the source of the revenues coming in to the water sewer fund. And so where do we use those revenues? That revenues, which is close to about $80 million, that revenue has to support all of the operations and maintenance expenditures, the capital program funding, where we do some capital program with cash financing to the extent possible, but really a significant portion of the capital program is really funded through long-term debt. And then also not only doing those 2 things, but making sure that we have reserves to manage in a situation like this that we are dealing with. So we have 2 kinds of reserves: the operating reserves, we call it the O&M reserve, and then the rate stabilization reserve. Those are the 2 reserves that also have to be managed. So we use the revenues to manage all of those 3 things. And so what is really the benefit to the customers? The benefit to the customers really is the 24/7 water service, sewer service, and stormwater service that the city provides, and really that the customers come to rely on, and really managing the infrastructure so that that service can be provided, and having the fiscal resilience to handle a situation. Normally we talk about weather and those kinds of catastrophes, but now increasingly we also have to be thinking about things like this pandemic that comes on in our way. Next slide, please. So what we are going to do before we really talk about fiscal year 21 through 26, which is a 6-year outlook, we are going to talk first about fiscal 20, the budget year we are in, because what is happening right now has a direct impact. So let's look at the fiscal 20. So last year, when Public Works Department and Black and Veatch, when we came in front of you and we said, what would be the projections for 2020? And just as a reminder, in 2020, with the council approval, the city had a 4% rate increase. So when we looked at what the impact would be based on that 2.7% system-wide increase that the city had, we had projected 83.6 million for fiscal year 20 as the revenues for the utility, water, sewer, and stormwater, including wholesale, retail, all of it together. And now at this current time, we have done a revised projection given what is happening with COVID since the shelter in place went into effect March 16th. And now what we are projecting is 79.3 million. So as you can see, there's a $4 million reduction in the revenues in fiscal 20 that we are expecting. So that definitely puts pressure on the water sewer fund. On the operating cost side, we are not showing any change. We had projected about 61 million. The actual is coming in at about 61.5 million, about $500,000 more. And then in terms of the debt service, we had projected about 21.2. It's coming in a little less. And then the rate stabilization reserve in fiscal 20, we had said that we would have about 7.2 million, but it looks like now we may have about 8.1 million. So that's really what the total picture looks like. And this drop in revenues from 83.6 million to 79.3 million is really because of what we are projecting as a revenue decrease due to COVID-19 in this 4 months, March, April, May, and June. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what is the impact of COVID-19. As we have seen happening, there are two major areas where we feel that there's going to be an impact. The first is customer usage. What we are calling is a reduction in customer usage. And the reduction in customer usage immediately translates to a reduction in revenues, billable revenues. Now, how is this happening? How we projected this? What we projected was, on the residential side, inside and outside the city, the customer usage will actually go up in the 4 months of March, April, May, and June. And that's because majority of the residents are now staying home, kids are staying home, more hand washing, all of those things, we expect the consumption to increase. But on the commercial side, we expect the consumption to decrease significantly because everything is shut down. And then on the industrial side as well, consumption will decrease because things are shut down. Now, what's happening in Wilmington is the increase in the residential usage is not sufficient enough to offset the decrease in commercial and industrial usage inside and outside city. So therefore, as a system, we are projecting a reduction in customer usage. And one validation point we have is that we did take a look at what's happening on the production, the treated water production that Wilmington has been producing. And we looked at what has been happening to that production volume from March 16th we first looked at it as a 2-week period and compared that with the same time frame of last year. And what we are finding is that the production has dropped by about close to 1.5 million gallons per day in terms of what is being supplied because the demand has dropped. So that's kind of validation point that we have used at this point in time. Now, as time goes, we will actually have the consumption data from the customers to as an additional validation point. But this is how we are projecting a reduction in overall system usage of water. So that leads to lower revenues. Second, corresponding with that, as you all know, because of governor stipulations and policies and local policies, there is no shut off. So anyone who was shut off, they would have been restored, and there are no shutoffs because of any kind of a delinquent payment. And so that is going to increase, that it's going to do two things. One, it would increase delinquencies in the short term. And two, the penalty and interest income that comes usually through enforcement of delinquency, there'll be a loss of that income. So those two combined is going to put pressure, again, a downward pressure on revenues. So that would also cause additional reduction in revenues. So these two are the challenges we are facing in terms of the revenue reduction. So just to give it in terms of a sense of numbers, the revenue reduction due to customer usage is about $2 million. And the revenue reduction due to increased delinquencies, and that's about another $1 million. And then we're also projecting for the 4 months a loss of, because of the penalty and interest waiver, that's also adding some loss. So in total, that's how you see the almost a $4.5 million of loss in revenues just in fiscal 20, these 4 months, March, April, May, June. We do anticipate some increase in operating costs, but again, it just in these 4 months, it's not significant. You just saw about a $500,000 increase. So all of these factors we have considered in projecting for not only for 2020, but we have also projected for the lower revenues and the increased delinquencies. We are not only projecting for 4 months of fiscal 20, but we are also expecting a lingering effect for the first 6 months of 21. So that's how we did the projections. Next slide, please. So now what we're going to do is to really talk about the 21 through 26 financial plan, where we'll talk a little more about the revenues, the revenue requirements, and the financial plan itself. Next slide, please. Pam, do you want to take it on?
Sure, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Yes, as Prabha mentioned, we now want to present our 21 through 26 financial projections. The objective of the 6-year plan, as Prabha has been discussing, is really driven around the need to achieve key performance metrics. And while I won't go into each of these individually, the key is really that the financial plan, the utility needs to be able to achieve these financial performance metrics based on current revenues, so that your current year water and sewer fund revenues generated in that fiscal year need to be sufficient in order to achieve all of the targets that are important to financial resiliency. As Prabha mentioned, we do have two water sewer fund reserves, which, as will be seen as we present these the 6-year financial plan, have been very instrumental in helping the utility be in a position to withstand what, at least at this current time, we're projecting the financial impact of the pandemic. So we're very, very happy that the City Council and administrative's leadership and utilities leadership led to the implementation of these two reserves here in the last couple of years. Next slide, please. This slide is presenting a breakdown of the projected revenue under existing rates. And as Prabha was just discussing, we have projected an impact for the declining consumption and the increased delinquencies and the loss of penalties and interest income in fiscal year 20 as well as 21. And you can see that on the left-hand side of this slide. In fiscal 19, revenue under existing rates was $83.6 million. And as you can see, we are projecting that revenue will be substantially less in fiscal 20 and even more impacted in 21. As Prabha mentioned, we are anticipating lingering effects of this through the first half of the fiscal year 2021, which basically through the end of the calendar year 2020. So we are not projecting a return to fiscal 19 levels of revenue under existing rates until fiscal 22. Next slide, please. So there are two primary cost drivers that are driving the cost side of the financial plan. The first is the capital improvement program, as probably mentioned earlier, with $158 million worth of spending needed in the 6-year financial plan. That does drive the cost side of the equation. However, the utility is really doing a good job of implementing a number of different strategies for funding that capital program to minimize the cost to customers. And that includes leveraging low interest state revolving fund loans. They have been very active in trying to achieve any grant funding that is possible. There is some modest general fund bond money that is anticipated in this, as well as some practical levels of cash funding in order to provide all of the funding needs for the capital program. Next slide. So what that does, however, is it does increase the average debt service each year. Line 1 of this graphic shows that the existing debt service that's currently outstanding is roughly around $20 million per year. We are projecting future debt service on new loans, new bonds, beginning in fiscal 21 of about 1.8 million and increasing over the study period. So an additional $28.5 million in debt service to fund the capital program. Next slide. But the capital program, as has been discussed, is really critical to helping the utilities maintain the systems in sound order. We wanted just to spend a couple of minutes here to highlight a few projects that are real success stories for the utility. And Vince, if you're available, could you talk about the next couple of slides? Next slide, please.
Sure, Pam. So one of the projects that was done throughout fiscal 20 on this slide is the 11th Street distribution main replacement. We had a blowout on a section of main that was installed in the late 1800s, resulted in a rather large water leak over at 11th and Orange Street throughout the earlier in this calendar year. 12-inch stub main that's on our high service line. This required a shutdown of an 1875 transmission main. We were able to get it controlled by 5 o'clock that afternoon. No service disruptions, no bore water advisories. We've also just now completed installation of a new 24-inch and 16-inch transmission lines and a new 8-inch distribution main from Adams Street to French Street that will allow us to take these older mains out of service. They are in service now. Next slide, please. And wastewater related projects, we had a leak at our 11th Street sewage pumping station with a 12-inch vent pipe last summer. We were able to perform a rapid response, set up containment area to prevent any sewage from entering the Brandywine Creek. We did a temporary repair with a 12-inch pipe clamp, and then designed a permanent repair, which later in that week resulted in replacement of approximately 15 feet of this vent pipe with HDPE, high density polyethylene pipe, and installation of a new vent pipe, as is shown in the photo, along the front of the 11th Street pump station building. Another project that was recently completed is installation of a new sewage pumping station on Justice Street with a Muffin Monster grinder. That'll be a new station that will support all of the development down in that part of the city. Pam, back over to you.
Next slide, please. And actually, Prab, I think you're going to.
Sure. Yeah, next slide, please.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is an example of the stormwater project that we wanted to talk about. So many of you are very familiar with the South Wilmington Wetlands Project, which is a really big signature project that's happening in the city. And we would like to highlight this as a success story, especially this year, more so than even the previous year, because what we want to highlight here is the extent of funding that we have been able to accomplish, the city has been able to garner for this. As you can see in this pie chart, that's the number of different funding sources the city has actually effectively garnered for one big project. And so the state revolving fund loan is about $12 million. And the most recent success is the city applied for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, and this project was selected for it. And so the city got $3 million that we didn't have in our last rate study because this grant came in. And so because of that, what we were able to do in this projection, we were able to reduce the clean water state revolving fund loan borrowing by that same amount. And so that's why the state revolving fund loan amount is only 12 million instead of 15 million, because now this National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant money is being effectively used. So this project that shows the combination of funding sources, and the total project cost for this project at this point in time is 25.8 million. And this is how it's being funded. Next slide, please. So Pam talked about the capital infrastructure and the cost driver and how it impacts the debt service. The other second cost driver is the operations and maintenance that we talked about just a little while ago. And water and wastewater are functions where the annual average cost increase certainly runs higher than the normal CPI increase, and especially the wastewater it's more significant. So what we are showing based on the projections that we have done is the 6-year average annual O&M increase is about 2.64% per year is what we're projecting. So it basically goes, you could see here, the blue indicates the water, and then the green indicates the wastewater increase, with 27 million on the water side going up to 31 million, and on the wastewater side from 34 million going up to 38 million. And this is critical for operating 24/7, all the services needed for the community. Next slide, please. So on the operation side also, we want—
Can I interrupt you for a second? President Shabazz, did you have a question?
I just wanted to make a statement, and there was no way that we was going to go past the wetland and not say how full of gratitude on behalf of the residents of South Bridge that the wetlands is coming along with the sewer separation to address the flooding that has been plaguing that community for almost 50 years. So I just wanted to just applaud the Public Works for all the great work that's done. It's taken us quite a time to get it done. And but we're there. I see peeps of it. It's really beautiful. It's going to be a great amendment to our community. And I also want to thank my colleague, Councilman Hawley, for coming up and jumping right in and making sure that the project kept going as she came in leadership at 4th District. So just wanted to thank Public Works and all of the collaborative partners for what that's going to do for the Southbridge community. That's all. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
President Shabazz have a question or no?
No, it was an out of order statement, sir. But I had to say something about the great work of the wetlands, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Go ahead.
Thank you. So on the operating side, we also wanted to highlight a success story, so to speak. As the Deputy Commissioner indicated, the big achievement here is really selecting the contract operator for the next 20 years for the Wilmington wastewater treatment plant. And that really helps with long-term operations efficiency. And what we wanted to touch here is that while it might look simple. You could see the timeline, and we wanted to just kind of highlight where it started and how long it took, and the persistence of really a team. So it really started in fall of 2017, first with Public Works doing a plan to decide what would be the best option for the long-term operations of the wastewater treatment plant. So they evaluated the options, and then they decided at that point, evaluating the options, that procuring a new contract was the best path to go forward. And right after that, then in summer of 2018, to make sure that the new contract operator, people who are bidding on that, have sufficient information, Public Works actually did a needs assessment for the wastewater treatment plant. They assessed the plant condition and the capital projects needed, and that was done and completed in summer of 2018. And right after that, because it was clear that the new contract operator, all the due diligence needed to bring a new contractor operator will take time, the department then extended Veolia's contract by 2 years. And that also happened in summer of 2018. So therefore, that contract is actually coming to an end in June of this year. And so right after that, then the team worked together and first issued a request for information, request for qualifications, RFQ. And based on that, then the city got actually 5 responses, and those were then evaluated. And from those 5 responses, then 3 bidders were selected to submit request for proposal, the RFP. The RFP was an extensive effort to put together a very comprehensive RFP, and that was completed in summer of 2019. And then that was issued to the bidders. And then in September of 2019, the bidder submitted the response there. And so what you see there right in the middle in item number 6 is the bidders had a chance to first visit the wastewater treatment plant. That was all coordinated with Veolia. All the bidders, the 3 bidders who did the 2 bidders who finally decided to submit, they had a chance to visit the wastewater treatment facility for multiple days. Then they submitted an extensive set of questions that the city fielded and responded to in time. And then the bidder submitted their proposals. Then the interviews were held by the city evaluation team. And then finally, all of that was completed in fall of 2019. And now the bidder has been selected. And then as the council members, you all know, OMI Jacobs has now been selected. So all of that process was completed. And really, Public Works Department and the city completed the contract negotiations during the last few months. And now, and the council approval finally was secured on March 19th, and OMI is all set to begin their 20-year term in July of 2020. So this has been a long road, and so we just wanted to highlight how on the operation side, this is very, very critical in terms of cost saving as well. Pam, back to you.
Great. Thanks. This slide is presenting the results of the 6-year financial plan, and we have included fiscal year 20, the current year that we're in as well, due to the adjustments that we have been discussing related to reduction of revenues due to the pandemic. Lines 1 and 2 summarize the projected revenue increases for the water and sewer utilities, which is in line 1, and for stormwater. And as you can see, we are projecting no change to stormwater rates through fiscal 26. We also are projecting no change to rates in fiscal 21 for water and sewer. However, because of that and because of some of the other financial results that we'll talk about next, we are projecting the need for 8.5% increases in both fiscal 22 and 23 to bring the utility back to those key financial metrics that we talked about earlier. And then lower rate increases are projected at this time in fiscals 24, 25, and 26. The primary driver of the financial results is the reduction in revenues. As you can see in line 6, line 3 summarizes the projected revenues. Line 4 then is less the O&M expenditures. Line 5 is less the debt service. And as you see in line 6, The result is the current year revenues in both fiscal 20 and in fiscal 21 are insufficient to cover those O&M and debt service expenses by about $2.8 to $2.9 million per year. So we've talked before, because of the sound financial planning and practices of the utility and the implementation of the operating reserves and the rate stabilization reserve. However, we do have a beginning of year operating balance that you see in line 7. We do also, in addition to O&M and debt service, we are projecting some cash financed capital for the study period as well. And that's driven by the need to balance both fund balances as well as debt service coverage that we'll talk about a little bit more on the next slide. However, in order to recover all of the costs for the O&M, debt service, and cash finance capital, as you can see in line 10, we are assuming a withdrawal from the rate stabilization reserve of $3 million in fiscal 20 and an additional $4.5 million in fiscal 21. And that provides us with an end of year operating fund balance that's shown in line 11. And as you can see again in red, the operating fund balance that we're projecting is not achieving the 17% operating reserve balance that is outlined per the reserve ordinance. But again, we're just trying to balance everything out. So you can see compared to line 12, which is that 17%, we aren't quite achieving that, but we are, so we're bringing that operating reserve balance down in the near term due to the pandemic, with the goal then to bring it back up. And as you can see by fiscal 23, we are able to bring that operating reserve balance back to the 17% level. In line 13, you can see the results of the use of the rate stabilization reserve. By the end of fiscal 21, we have really drawn down and used virtually all of the rate stabilization reserve in order to avoid necessary rate increase. We do, however, through we do bring it back to just a little above $1 million by the end of fiscal 26. And I should say, you know, again, we do have a disclaimer here. Normally we don't, but due to the uncertainty of this pandemic as far as the extent of the impact on everybody and the duration, it's really as important as it always is to be continually looking at a 6-year financial plan and updating it and reviewing it each year. It's doubly important now that the utility will continue to monitor revenues and expenditures to make sure that there are sufficient revenues available. Next slide, please. This slide then shows those key performance metrics that we talked about earlier. The first 2 lines, again, are showing the projected revenue increases. And as you can see in line 1, we are projecting that, and lines 1 and 2 are 2 different ways to look at the operating reserve. One is the number of days, and then line 2 then is the percent of the following year's operating budget. And as you can see, as I mentioned before, we are projecting that it will not achieve 17% balance through fiscal 22, but by fiscal 23, we will be able to bring it back up to the 17% mark. As I mentioned earlier, we are assuming some cash finance capital in fiscal 20 and 21 for current projects that are currently underway, and those funds have been authorized for those projects. And also the need to really manage that debt service coverage ratio. Again, as we talk about resilience moving into the future, we talk about a 1.2 time target for that debt service coverage, 1.1% as a minimum. We do get there by fiscal 23. Okay. Again, this slide then just, was there a question?
No, go ahead. Continue on.
Okay, so this slide is again just another graphical illustration of the operating reserve balance, and as you can see, we are, as I mentioned earlier, basically depleting the rate stabilization reserve in order to minimize the impact on the O&M reserve and the impact on rates and rate increases that would otherwise be needed. And you can see that that deficit here in the operating reserve balance, even using the rate stabilization reserve. But by fiscal 23, as I mentioned before, with the revenue increases that we're projecting, we are projecting that the utilities would be back to 17%. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does this mean from the standpoint of our city and utility ratepayers? Next slide. Again, we aren't projecting any change to the rates that are currently in place. So the graphics that you see, the tables on the left-hand side of this graphic represent the typical bill for a residential customer with a 5/8" meter using 4,000 gallons per month. So inside city customers for water, sewer, and stormwater combined is just under $60 per month. For outside city customers with water and sewer service, it is about 76.5%. And again, the city of Wilmington is providing the water service for those customers. But just it's important to really kind of take that into consideration, that what we're projecting under these existing rates, the city of Wilmington's tap water is still under a penny per gallon for inside city customers, and the daily cost of water usage is about $1.05 for this typical customer, and wastewater, stormwater combined is about 76 cents. So to put that into some perspective, if you were to pay $1 for a gallon of bottled water, and most folks at the convenience store are paying more than $1 for half a liter of water, but for $1 per gallon of bottled water, that's 125 times more expensive than the service that the city is providing to customers. This graphic shows the comparison of the current Wilmington rates with others in the region, as you can see. So Wilmington inside city is the first column that you see, and other communities are then shown. Blue is the water portion of the bill, the gray is the sewer portion of the bill, and then in green for those that have monthly stormwater, we have shown that as well. And as we've been talking throughout this presentation, the key strategies for this 21 through 26 financial plan is really to continue to build financial stability. We can't say it enough that the utilities came into this pandemic in a sound financial shape that is really instrumental in helping you strive through this. So the financial plan manages no increase in fiscal 21 given the circumstances. It funds all of the operating and maintenance requirements and the planned capital needs. And again, as we talked before, really maximizing those low interest loans and available grants to minimize that cost to the extent possible. We're leveraging the existing fund balances to manage that revenue impact due to the pandemic, and really restoring and building the financial stability by fiscal 23, getting to the 17% operating reserve, and then building the rate stabilization reserve back to at least around $1 million by the end of fiscal 26.
Okay, questions from council members? Mr. Johnson.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for your presentation. And in terms of looking kind of going for the bridge from 2021 to 2022, at what point do we get with usage where we start to at least break even? Because it looks like the economy will at least somewhat reopen in parts? And is there a point where we're going, because it seems like your projections are based off of the current usage, which is nothing right now. So what about when there's actually starts to be commercial use again? Is
Right.
there where we actually end up being positive somewhat or close to positive?
Well, what we've basically done, and as Prabha mentioned earlier, we had very limited data, looking at production data, very limited data to really understand at this point in time, really ultimately what the impact could be. But for fiscal 20, we've made assumptions with regard to a slight increase, some increase in residential and apartment usage during this time, since everyone's home, working from home, schooling at home, and so forth, and with a reduction for commercial and industrial through the end of fiscal 20. And then in fiscal 21, we are assuming a reduction that will continue through the end of the calendar year. And then, obviously, over time, it'll be more of a phased in approach, but we're assuming a decline, this reduction in usage through the end of the year, and then the beginning of calendar year 21, January through June, returning to that fiscal 19 level. So our revenue projections at this point in time are assuming that by January of 21, we'll have been through the worst of it and be back to fiscal 19 usage levels.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Harley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to piggyback off of my colleague. The department did a great job with the presentation, laying out everything very clearly, pros and cons. And I can really see all of the data points that you all put together. One point I wanted to make was, were you able to look at any previous year's usage in terms of how you calculated your projection? I'm sort of piggybacking off of Councilman Johnson. I was just curious about any previous calculations being dialed into these projections.
We did look at the production data and compared to the production data for the same time period last year as a guide in what we're looking at. We've also been looking at available data from other utilities that have, we're starting to see what that impact would be. And the assumptions that we've made to usage, both in the increase on the residential side and the decrease on the commercial and industrial side, does get us to that reduction in the production plant that the utility has been seeing. And probably, I don't know if you have anything further you'd like to add to that.
Sure. So at the time when we did the study in preparation for this meeting today, we really had 2 weeks of production data. So we literally asked Public Works to provide us the production data from March 16th when shelter in place went into effect, and for 2 weeks. And we got daily data for those 2 weeks to see what was actually happening in terms of the supply. And we noticed that it was coming down by about 1.5 MGD per day. And then we compared that to see what was the city supplying same period, March 16th through April the 4th, prior year. And that's when we found that every single day consistently, the production was down. So that was one data point we had. And so when we translated that 2 weeks worth of data to basically 4 months of that scenario repeating for all the way through June, and then we looked at the total, so we kind of looked at that total consumption, and we found that it was kind of aligning. So the reductions that we were making, where we were assuming residential consumption to go up, commercial consumption to come down by pretty much 50%. So that was the assumption we made. For March, April, May, June, we assumed that the commercial consumption would come down 50% of their normal. Industrial would come down about 25% of their normal. And so and then the residential would go up. So when we did all of that configuration, we basically were able to project what the total revenue reduction in 2020 would be because of these 4 months. And then what we did, we assume that while the residential will continue to come back to normalcy, because we are hoping that in July, people slowly get back to normalcy. And so we assume that the residential will go back, not to the increased levels, but go to the normal levels of fiscal 19. But the commercial, we said, is going to linger because not every business is going to come back at full steam. So we assume for 6 months that the commercial there'll be still a 33% decrease. It won't be at a 50% reduction level from normal, but a 33% normal. Granted, we had to make these projections, but we will be monitoring working with Public Works in May and in June as the consumption data comes in. We'll get another validation point to see whether we are too conservative or whether we have been less conservative. But as Pam said, we are also keeping an eye on what's happening in the industry. And generally the trend, what we have projected is correct. The trend is that in majority of the places in the country, residential usage is going up, commercial is coming down, and industrial is coming down.
Oh, awesome. It sounds like y'all have done an awesome analysis of, both commercial and residential as relates to the times that we're living. And my second question is that I guess it's been over a year now when we went from quarterly billing to monthly billing, and there was a concern in terms of how residents would be paying. Will there be more delinquencies? Will people be paying more on time? And so my question is, what have y'all learned since we've been in this, I guess now for a year now, as it relates to switching from quarterly to
So in terms of that, fiscal 19 was the first year the city went into monthly billing, and the monthly billing at least doesn't really increase the delinquency because the bills are now smaller than a typical quarterly bill. The data point that we have from finance really was for fiscal 19, especially in fiscal 19, finance did a very good job of collecting the revenues that were outstanding. So when they're collecting the revenues that are due to the city, it really helps the future years, because now it's not money that is not collected. So there was a good collection effort in 2019 that really helped bring up the rate stabilization reserve balance that Pam was talking about. And that's really what is helping us manage this COVID-19 revenue reduction. What the good collection that finance did in 19 is actually helping us in 20. And then in 20, of course, what we did was we had to be practical. Based on the policies that are in place, we did assume complete loss of penalty and interest income for March, April, May, and June, 4 full months for the entire water sewer system. And we also assumed a complete loss of penalty and interest income from July through December. Even though things will come back to normalcy gradually, still people who have accumulated delinquency because of loss of jobs and furloughs and stuff like that, they need the time to get back. And my understanding is that the finance department is also proactively reaching out to get people to get into payment agreements. So we have assumed conservatively that July through December, the city will still not have the penalty and interest income. So that would still be a loss of revenue from that standpoint, but it's only practical because people need the time to get back and get their delinquency. So at this point, maybe I'll pause and if the finance director wants to say anything about that.
Oh, well, let me just say this. You don't have to go too deep into that. I think you did a great job in answering my question regarding when we switched over from quarterly to monthly. You made it very clear that they did a great job, finance department and collections, and has allowed us to be in a good position. So from my perspective, you did a great job, and we can move on if you want to.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gray.
Thank you. I have several questions. First, earlier you were speaking about chemical use for cleaning of, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, of treatment of our water. And I was wondering, are you concerned about disruption in the supply line for the chemicals during COVID?
I think that's probably a public works question.
I don't know
Vince?
if she'd have the answer to that. I don't know if Vince is still on the line. Vince Grocia, are you still with us?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair. So we have actually set up, when this all started breaking back in early March, we set up some alternate supply contracts for each of our bulk chemicals that we use in water treatment, just to assure that we had adequate supply. We've also recently put in expanded tankage up at our main plant, our Porter water filtration plant. So we normally will keep at least 30 days supply of all chemicals on site.
No, thank you very much. May I proceed with another question?
Okay.
I wanted to know, with the depletion of the O&M reserve balance, is the money being used, is it going to the sewer water general funds, or is it going to the general fund for the city?
The projection of the use of the any of the reserves are strictly with the water and sewer fund.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
That's it for me.
Thank you. Councilmember Oliver?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, Councilwoman Harley asked a question that I was going to ask, similar to the monthly and quarterly. But another question I wanted to ask before we go, because I'm gonna have to step away. I wanted to put the face with the new deputy. Is she on the line that Kelly was talking about? They said we would be able to see who she was or who they were.
Yeah, Ms. O, she was on earlier.
Okay, I didn't
I'm here.
Is she still? I'd like to just see who she is, because I had to step away, so I want to put the face with the name.
Yeah, I'm still on.
Could we put her on the screen so I can see who she is, please? Okay.
There she is.
Oh, yeah, I know her.
Nice
Okay.
to meet you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions from council members. I did want to and this is probably still in your emails, you probably haven't gotten to yet because it came today, but there was a letter sent to us from our citizens group, the Wilmington Utilities Citizens Advisory Board, and because of the pandemic and everything, they agree with the recommendation that we do not have a water sewer increase this year. So that's what the mayor proposed, no water sewer increase for fiscal year 2021, and we'll have to deal with that in 2022 and the years beyond. So that concludes our hearing for the 6-year presentation for our water plan. We're going to take a short break, and then we come back at 7 o'clock. We come back at 7 o'clock, and we'll be looking at revenue projections. I don't see anybody here from the public, so that's why I'm just going to keep moving on here. So at 7 o'clock, we'll come back, and the finance team will give us the news on revenue projections for fiscal year 2021. All right, so we'll be back here at 7 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.